morning, Jason Masker with Upstream, and you're joining me live from the Vehicle Security Operations Center in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And I'm sitting here with Brett Powers, the manager of the vSOC, and Yaniv Maimon, Vice President of Cyber Services. Good morning, gentlemen.
Morning.
Good morning.
So to start us off, I think I already got a few questions about this when we posted the event up on LinkedIn, but I think everyone's very familiar with a security operations center. How is a vehicle security operations center different? How do you define that, and how is that really differentiated? Yaniv?
Yeah, I think maybe let's start with defining it. Because I guess there are a lot of definitions out there. So just to make sure that everyone are on the same page, at least from our point of view, which I think in line with the regulation, we see the vSOC as the function that is owning the continuous security monitoring, detection, and response for cybersecurity threats, vulnerabilities, and attacks on connected vehicles. Maybe sounds a bit simple, but this is the way that we see it, and obviously, it's much broader than that. When you go into the details, and maybe at the future webinar, we can also go on the vSOC framework that we've built that sort of lists out the different capabilities and the different layers for the operation of the vSOC. But just to define it, this is the way that we see. So again, monitoring, detecting, and responding to cybersecurity threats and vulnerabilities in connected vehicles, and also their directly supporting infrastructure.
Okay, so a very domain-focused security operation there. So being focused on that, smart mobility and vehicles, what are the specific challenges? What's unique about that you're addressing? And Brett, could you take a few examples or challenges that you're seeing specifically to vehicles?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, again, kind of comparing and contrasting to traditional SOC, which kind of really, over the last 30 years has been more focused on endpoint detection, identity, SIM monitoring. Really what the challenges we have with the vSOC really center around technology and people monitoring, right? So you have, again, mobility. These are devices, even like IoT, where these what you're looking to monitor has different aspects and different data that's coming across through telematics servers and also through API. Again, a lot of these devices are accessed through consumer apps now. So this is a completely different shift than I think what traditional I'm a traditional security person is used to. I have a static laptop or server sitting in a data center that you're looking to monitor that data. Whereas when in mobility, now we have different ways that you're able to access and affect the endpoint. And it takes, again, that technology that's maybe more focused in different areas than what we've traditionally looked at, especially on API and telematics. And again, when it comes to OEMs, again, on the traditional IT side, Linux, Windows, those are pretty standard operating systems. OEMs tend to develop something, they all develop differently, right? They're platforms. And so now you have a bunch of different solutions that, need different tactics to be able and technology to be able to protect. And then you need the people trained to look at, the parsing, the custom parsing, the detections or analytic alerts that need to be developed to detect attacks against those devices. You need the personnel trained to be able to understand that data coming across what that means. Again, it's a little different. I think it's a little bit of a learning curve to take an analyst that works in more of a traditional SOC and then move them over to vSOC. There are just differences in the alert and the data that comes across, and also having to know what is going on in that OEM specific to how they built their platform to be able to do that analysis.
So beyond even just the vehicles, because as you mentioned, I have an app to start my car now. If you have an EV, you're using an app to manage charging. So it's really the focus on that entire ecosystem.
Yep.
Interesting. So when it comes to those manufacturers, you mentioned they're all developing differently. For your customer base, for what you guys have seen, what would you say the maturity is of these various manufacturers and what they're doing today as the technology is going? Are they keeping up with it? Are all of them kind of operating this vSOC model? Yaniv?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question. I think sort of one of the recurring themes around what Brett described as some of the challenges is sort of the lack of standardization in this field. And so, us working with quite many OEMs at this point in time, allowed us basically to have a broader view. And obviously, this question also arises. I think we received sort of a question for some of the audience, but definitely from our customers, and try to sort of understand where they're at within their sort of journey. And obviously, it takes time when you start building a vSOC up until you have a fully functional and quite mature vSOC. And this is why basically we created an approach or methodology. I think
you
maybe
shared a few slides.
Yeah. So maybe we can bring up one of the slides. So basically, what we try to do is to list out these, let's say, 2 elements, and because we want to create basically a basis for comparison between OEMs. So we look at 2 major aspects. One that we see here on the left-hand side is the data quality, or sort of what we can get out of the data that we use to monitoring, because at the end of the day, the vast majority of the monitoring that we do is based on the data that we receive to our platform, so we can detect the threats, we can detect anomalies. So looking at the data, we try to assess the maturity or the quality or the quantity of some of the things that we're getting. So we're looking, for example, on the coverage of data. So for example, how many different data sources, and you mentioned before, let's say the mobile companion app, and other types of sources that we use that are to some extent affecting the cybersecurity posture of the vehicles. So first, we have the coverage of the data that is being sent, the diversity of it, the quality, how accurate the data is, how complete and consistent it is from the vehicle coming in. And obviously, we've seen many OEMs that have challenges there. Also, the freshness of the data, so how quickly we can get it. Of course, the more real time we can get it, the better. So we can both do quick detection, but also the response in case it's needed, and also the richness, like what kind of depth and granularity of the data that we're getting in from the vehicles and from the entire infrastructure. So that's on the left-hand side. I think maybe for this webinar, it's more interesting on the right-hand side, which is what we call the vSOC execution, maturity, and rating. And in that, we look at sort of 5 major elements. So one on the readiness side. So how ready is the vSOC and the organization in general, with the vSOC driving, prepared to face real incidents? Do they, have playbooks? Do they conduct exercises? Know how to do crisis management in case something happens? So that's on the readiness side. On the prediction side, so being able to predict some of the threats, for example, using cyber threat intelligence or using offensive research, or doing purple teams with penetration testing, etc., just to make sure that the vSOC and again the organization behind it understand and can predict what kind of threat you're going to have. And then on the monitoring side, of course, to make sure that all the detection platforms are being monitored 24/7, follow the sun like we do. So we have right now the vSOC in the US and the vSOC here in Israel. So that's on the monitoring side. On the detection, of course, to have all the different capabilities, from rule-based and policy-based detection to machine learning-based detection, and to anomaly-based detection, etc. And even more than that, also to do proactive threat hunting. So not just to wait for alerts from a detection platform or our platform, but also to be proactive and look for malicious TTP, so techniques and procedures used by threat actors, so we can understand if something did happen in the past and be proactive about it as well. And lastly, the response, which is one of the most challenging parts, I guess, for an OEM, as in the vast majority of cases, we're the first one to provide sort of visibility into some of these threats. so both the monitoring and detection. And this is why we see that in again many cases the OEMs need to build response capabilities from scratch. So again, it's not enough, to be be able to predict a threat or to detect it, but you actually need to respond in case something does happen. And this is why we put a lot of emphasis on that. So these are like the 5 key areas that we look at when we're trying to assess the maturity of the vSOC. And of course, behind the scenes, we have a sort of much more detailed framework as to how to score and show this this maturity. And maybe moving on to the next screen. And I guess this is I think quite an interesting topic that we get questions from the industry in general. And of course, this is sort of an anonymized data, but sort of showing, comparing, contrasting some of the OEMs. This is sort of an exercise we did early this year to show the different OEMs. And of course, there are different types and different sizes of OEMs. So the size of the dot is basically the size of the fleet, and the halo is the coverage of that fleet within the vSOC. And so we're seeing, you can see here basically a few trends. And for example, you have passenger vehicles OEM, and you have commercial vehicle and agri types of OEMs. What we're seeing, and I think it's pretty clear that sort of at least the OEMs with the larger fleets tend to be a bit more mature. So some of them started early on with, I would say, and this is a bit of a generalization, that some of the commercial players got in a bit later. But this is basically the trend that we're seeing. And again, this is something that is a field that is developing quite rapidly. And I think we'll also discuss it in a bit, sort of what's there to come. And I guess if we show the same and do the same exercise next year, we're going to come up with very different results.
Yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, a very thought out security methodology there with something to say about mobility sort of for each one of those. And from this, it looks like you kind of see all types, right? Very large amounts of vehicles that are mature, but also smaller ones that are mature, and they're kind of all over the board, I see. So it's interesting. So if you guys have a few examples, one of the things we wanted to speak to, I'll just pull the slide down here, is real world use cases. So do you have any examples you could go through or walk through where this focus of mobility and the vSOC, everything that Upstream is kind of bringing together here, has really shown value or really paid off in a customer case or real world example?
Yes, yeah. So pretty good example is that there was a hacker / security researcher who spent several months looking for vulnerabilities in the mobility space. So there were reconnaissance attacks, so multiple injection attacks that we detected. So 2 months before this researcher went to publication, we started seeing indications of reconnaissance and then the actual attack. So this goes back to what I said previously, like having that technology in place to be able to detect that. Again, API-based attacks, application attacks, and also the people to be able to investigate, right? Because even if someone does say add 20 VINs to their app, right? That could be a fleet. It could be someone who just has 20 cars, right? So you need to have the ability, both on the technology side and on the analysis side, to be able to make that determination. So after we saw these enumerations, then we started detecting the actual attacks. So unauthorized, again, kind of unauthorized 401 bad requests that we started identifying the API gateway, end user activity that looked abnormal and suspicious. And then because, again, of our platform, we could geolocate the fact that, the person that was trying to run these commands on the app was in a completely different location than the actual asset, so the car. So that was another indication that something nefarious was going on, right? So and then because we had the visibility, we were able to with the OEMs that we were monitoring, be able to put in response actions so that attacker couldn't carry out, basically the research. So when they did do the publish the research, the customers that we were monitoring weren't part of that publication. So that was, I think, a validation for us. But again, this is a security researcher. We're seeing a lot more of attacks, just in general. Like, this is a growing space for threat actors, and so there are more use cases to come, unfortunately.
That's an interesting example for sure, and we could security research we could debate as a topic itself sometime maybe. But I mean, if what you're saying is that basically, I think you're talking about a happy executive office and a happy board if they're hearing about this 2 months early versus reading about it in the press.
Yes.
That good example. Yaniv, did any come to mind for you?
Yeah, I think I actually have a very specific example I want to share, but maybe before that, try and classify, we talked about value and what we bring. So obviously, detecting and responding to cybersecurity threats and vulnerabilities, this is our bread and butter, right? This is what we do. This is what, the main focus for the vSOC, actually responding to threats, but also, making sure that the OEMs are compliant with the regulations. But I think other than that, we're seeing additional 2 areas that we focus on that bring value to our customers. One is the fraud area. So fraudulent activities that aren't necessarily the result of cybersecurity attacks. Could be warranty fraud, could be different types of aftermarket activities that are violating terms and conditions and things of that sort. Like subscription and things of that sort that are impacting financially the OEMs, even though they're not necessarily considered cyber attacks. So fraud, definitely a major use case for most of our customers. And then another one would be providing operational visibility, and this is to some extent a byproduct of monitoring anomalies, which is a part of what we do. So it's not uncommon for us to come across different types of issues for example, like faulty over-the-air update campaigns, or some glitches on the back end. You mentioned an API gateway previously, so sort of glitches there that we see, like anomalies in the types of response that we're seeing and things of that sort. So definitely something that we do, even if it's not the main focus for the vSOC.
So you find yourself contributing value, it sounds like, even to the development of the evolution of the smart mobility scene as well, as they're developing these applications and these vehicles. You're seeing a lot monitoring from that position of observability, right?
Absolutely, across the organization, by the way. So people, developing the product, but also from the IT, and infrastructure aspects, customer experience, things of that sort. So definitely areas that we can bring the value. So I think, you mentioned before an example of an attack. So something that was published, right? Because it was a security research that was involved. There are other incidents that are, let's say, less publicly available, or sort of the knowledge of. And sort of one thing we can share, and I'll share my screen in a second, just I think it might be interesting for the audience to see sort of how it looks on the platform, to see a real incident of a different kind, let's say. This is an attack that we saw on several OEMs, basically attacking the enrollment phase of the mobile companion app and the vehicle. And we've seen, across industries that this is sort of the weak link to some extent, the initial enrollment, because on the business side, you want to make sure that enrollment is easy because you want people to use the app. And so to some extent, there is a, let's say, less security controls are involved in this process because you want to make it as easy as possible. And so what we've seen is, and just, so we're on the same page, the way that it usually goes. And for some OEMs, when you want to enroll, sort of pair for the first time, the mobile companion app and the vehicle, you need to input the VIN, right, the vehicle identification number of the vehicle inside the app. And basically from the app, there is a request that goes to usually, an API gateway or some kind of server on the back end of the OEM. And there's a request coming in from the vehicle, sort of a pop-up on the infotainment screen inside the vehicle, which is sort of a security control, because you need to physically be inside the vehicle while it's turned on and approve it. Okay, so there is obviously a security control. But basically what we've seen is an attacker that sort of took advantage of this. That is something that is based on API, something you can script. So instead of using a real app, basically using an API type of script, and so enumerating numerous VINs. This is why we call it a VIN spray attack, which is sort of a distributed type of attack, and basically sending a request to multiple VINs. And the way that the VINs are in vast majority of OEMs, basically the last 6 digits are sequential. So it's enough that you know one real VIN, so you can sort of run through them using a script in a sequential way, approaching dozens, hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands of different VINs, basically to do this type of request. And this is a type of attack that we foresaw. And again, there is some kind of trade-off with how easy it is to enroll a mobile app and a vehicle, and something that we sort of foresee as a possible attack scenario. And this is why we have basically a detection in place to detect this type of activity before we even saw it happening in the field. So maybe I can quickly share my screen and show you how something like that actually look. And again, this is a real attack that we saw across several of our customers in the field. And there are different ways you can detect it. And I think Brett mentioned one earlier. You can look at, let's say, the difference of the geolocation of the vehicle itself and the IP address, for example, of the mobile app. But there are other ways you can do this as well. For example, you can look at the number of vehicles that are correlated or paired with a single consumer account. And in this case, and this is, of course, a demo platform, not a real example, but not that far off from reality, you can see basically an alert of a trigger detector that is called too many correlated vehicles to a consumer. So basically looking at the threshold of, let's say, 10 vehicles at a certain time interval, let's say a few minutes, and basically if there are any something that is beyond this range, it will create an alert, pretty similar to this one that we're seeing here. So in this case, you can see, so one consumer communicated to over 120 vehicles in a specific time interval. So that triggered an alert. And of course, the way that our platform is geared towards the vSOC analysts, because we want to make their lives as easy as possible to be able to investigate, we also provide context, for example, how many similar alerts we've seen in the last 24 hours or in the last few months. And we provide additional context, for example, looking at the timeline of the incident and providing additional information, such as the digital twin of the consumer account. So looking, for example, on the consumer ID, which is encrypted in this case, or the email, IP address, etc., and also the geolocation of sort of the distance you can see between the vehicle and the mobile app. So again, just one example out of many of some of the types of attacks that we've seen that have not gone really public up until to this point.
So yeah, we just kind of pivoted from the talking about very domain-specific operations and tooling, and this is a great domain-specific attack example where you're showing to be effective in actually investigation as well, right? This is, I guess, once you're alerted, to be able to look in and try to understand what's going on, you've got it all right here.
Yep, and alerted and detecting is one part, but it's not enough. You also need to respond. And so in this case, and I mentioned the response part earlier, we built in advance response tools together with our customers. So once we detect something like this, we can also respond and, for example, suspend the offending account, unpair the vehicles, block the IP address, etc. So we can also mitigate it.
Oh, so is there any anything you could say to kind of sum up an overall core set of best practices or advice that you would offer up to OEMs, people in the mobility industry, smart car EV industries, that you would say are core to success? Brett, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think I really evaluate your tool sets. again, I think a lot of people approach security from the traditional, security operations center methodology and tooling. Make an evaluation of what you have, and if it really gives you full visibility into your mobility space, and then also, again, invest in training for your people. A lot of things are moving towards APIs, DevSecOps. And you're going to be ahead of the game if you start investing in your people now to get them trained up in that space.
Yaniv, anything to add?
I think maybe one thing, and again, I sort of mentioned it in the beginning, is try to have like the end goal in mind, and it's hard, but you need to have a vision on where you want to go through and how to build it with the different steps, because again, it's a journey. And also important to understand sort of the flow and how to start and not to overburden to some extent with the scope, because it can get quite large pretty quickly.
Yeah, I can imagine. So as we're coming to a close of 2023, and I think it's a good time to talk about, it's on everybody's mind. Is there a theme that you could define across 2023 of what that was about, and if you have any observations about that and kind of what you see changing as we look towards 2024, what you see more of. I will seed that with something, just because it was in a lot of the questions leading into this, but there's a lot of questions about GenAI. I mean, It's been impossible to ignore across technology, right? There's a lot of discussion about how this impacts the security industry. Does it have, what are the specific implications of, as technology shifting and changing, something like that going into 2024? If you could think about that too. Brett, you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, 2023, I think, again, it was, the mind shift around mobility. A lot of the industry started changing the terminology from just, automotive to mobility, understanding that there's a lot of, devices out there that, it's not as simple as it used to be when you start connecting, vehicles up, and then kind of looking ahead to 2024, like, as you mentioned, GenAI is on everyone's mind now. And so from two perspectives, right? And I just had a conversation about this the other day, like, back in the day, but looking at regex to try to find vulnerabilities versus just now leveraging GenAI to be able to find vulnerabilities, build exploits, that the threat actors are going to use these tools to be able to, as a force multiplier, to be able to impact environments. And then on the defensive side, us, and other security software companies are using machine learning and AI as well, and integrating that into our tools. So we do have that ability to do quicker detection and mitigation of threats. So I think that's going to probably dominate, the next, 2024, that conversation on both sides. It's going to be pretty interesting.
I think it's on a lot of people's minds. It definitely feels like an arms proliferation, right?
Yes.
This very sophisticated, easy to use tooling could be used for malice. Yaniv, what do you see ahead in 2024?
Yeah, just to sort of complete that thought around GenAI, I think, one, we already integrated some of those capabilities into our platform and operations. And, like the attackers, we're also thinking, how we can leverage these tools to better do a job, and quite some interesting use case, and I hope we can share in the near future for us to do. So definitely something of major focus for us. I think maybe one additional theme that we saw around 2023, and you mentioned the word proliferation before, right, is of additional, let's say, segments in the ecosystem of mobility. So, for example, looking at the charging aspect for EVs, that most players are invested in to some extent, some extremely, some maybe not so much yet, but definitely something that we see evolving more and more. We mentioned, sort of a hyper connectivity of the vehicles with some of the newer models, some, being extremely connected, the function that they give, the type of data that they upload to the backend, which is extremely rich, and sort of how to leverage all that from the vSOC point of view to provide better, detection, better being prepared a lot more to handle some of these new threats. So definitely some of the recurring themes for 2023, and looking at 2024, we'll see, at least on that end, I guess more of the same, but to much bigger volumes.
Yeah, great. Well, I want to thank both of you guys for joining me today. I think this is it's been a good discussion and definitely shed some light on the mobility operations at Upstream and the operations. I know we have some questions from the audience, so I wanted to take. I know we've got about 14, 15 minutes left. Unless you guys have anything else you'd like to share as sort of a final thought, maybe we'll take a few of these questions from the audience here.
I think we have very good. I'm seeing some questions. I was seeing it as we go. I think we have some very good questions. So I think we can cover also quite a lot with that.
Yeah. So Lee, do you want to share our first question here?
Absolutely. Thank you for that presentation. And here is your first question. This one's for Yaniv. How do you build your cybersecurity incident response activities? And can you give an example of any kind of playbook for fleets? Yeah.
So I think maybe an easy way to answer this is sort of address the incident that we showed earlier. So let's say, again, you have this potential use case of someone exploiting, let's say, the enrollment and then start trying to correlate with many vehicles to create some kind of an impact, right? So again, you need to have a use case in mind. You need to have like an understanding of what can possibly go wrong to some extent, right? And so the way that we build this, the incident response process is having sort of a workflow on the different steps that we need to take, aligned with industry best practices, but tweaked a bit just to make sure that it fit the needs of OEMs and automotive in general. So we're creating basically a body of knowledge of, let's say, the different type of reasons that can lead, because there could be also, right reasons. And I also saw, I think someone asked about false positives, which also something that we get a lot. So understanding the body of knowledge and making sure that we understand sort of the use case in a deep way, that we can understand that there could be, in some cases, dozens of different types of activities that are legitimate or mostly legitimate. So we can sort of play them out and make sure that we address only the ones that are not, and sort of following that flow, starting with detection and how to investigate and to classify if this is a real incident or not, how to escalate if needed. And I also mentioned beforehand having the tools in place. So let's say we detected something, we investigate, we do a triage first, we investigate, we see this is a real incident, then we follow the guidelines, either specific ones, if we're lucky, or the more generic ones, and basically employ the tools that we have in place to mitigate these kind of threats, or escalate in case we don't. And of course, in the many industries, and maybe in automotive more than let's say the average, we also put a lot of focus on root cause analysis. So in case something did happen and we didn't respond well, to make sure that we understand sort of the root cause behind it and get better in the next turn. So that's sort of like
a kind of a feedback loop into the false positives and kind of keeping the whole thing evolving.
Absolutely, and this is again a major part of the incident response process for the vSOC.
Thank you, Yaniv. Brett, here's a question for you. How many estimated vehicles are monitored worldwide today by a vSOC?
Yeah, so our vSOC, Upstream's vSOC, is monitoring over 25 million vehicles globally at this point, and growing. Yeah.
Thank you. Yaniv, another question for you. Which is more vulnerable, a private passenger or a heavy vehicle? And how many vehicles is your vSOC monitoring?
So I think maybe commercial vehicles. So we won't get into the numbers, I guess, specifically. Brett said the 25 million in general. we can say that the majority is passenger vehicle, which is not surprising, I guess. Which is more vulnerable? It depends, right? On one hand, you have passenger vehicles that are much more common. They cost less, so people like to play around with them maybe more than commercial vehicles. This is why some of the different vulnerabilities are discovered, or some of the weaknesses that people exploit. But on the other end, we should use the same coin, right? Commercial vehicles are much more expensive. And in many cases, we also see they also come with a lot more, let's say, aftermarket devices that are well integrated into the vehicles, in which OEMs don't always have the level of control that they have in the components that they manufacture. So different risks, different threats, and in some cases also different types of impact. So a safety impact of a heavy vehicle can be very different from a passenger car. And also around fraud. So again, the fraudulent aspects that we see are quite different. I think at that point we can get really into the details, but they are quite different. Yes.
Thank you, Yaniv. Brett, another one for you. What is the best practice to protect a vehicle integrated with API?
Yeah, I mean, so best practice, definitely have an API security solution kind of up front to be able to monitor that activity, and then have a SOC monitoring it. Again, anything connected to the internet should be monitored 24/7. Some organizations aren't monitoring and don't have that visibility, so that is a challenge. I think APIs in general, especially in our space, the fact that they're able to access, again, mobile vehicles. Yaniv brought up, charging stations. Again, everything in this ecosystem is now being connected and interconnected. So it's increasingly important to have a solution that monitors it, and then actively, not just have the technology, but have the people in place to do that, and then the processes, like we said, the playbook, so that when something does happen, it's understood what the action is, because the impact could be pretty dire if there's not quick action, going forward.
Thank you. Some live questions now. How do we make sure that there aren't high cases of false positives through vSOC operations?
Yeah, I can take this. I think we sort of alluded to this before. I think there could be different causes for this. One could be data quality of data coming in from the vehicle. And I mentioned before, most, if not all, OEMs have some kind of data quality issue. In some cases, they're aware of it. In some cases, we're making them aware. But it's usually sort of a behavior that we can predict. And this is something that we also work with OEMs, and another value we bring, sort of data observability point of view. So if something is wrong with the data, we can augment it. Additional cases are, just as I mentioned before, understanding the different types of activities and behaviors. And this is something that you need to work with in time. In addition to that, also from the process side of view. So for example, we have quality control processes to make sure that we address all false positives, to make sure that we look into different classifications of incidents. So maybe someone is classifying something as an analyst as a false positive, which is not, or maybe the other way around. So we do have all these processes in place, quality-based processes, to make sure that we're seeing and handling basically potential false positives.
Thank you. Next question. Has the adoption of AUTOSAR throughout the industry helped bring standardization to different OEMs' operating systems?
I think this is a bit of a broad question. I can mention, maybe I can answer it just from maybe a narrow point of view from the vSOC and sort of monitoring and detection. It allowed, from what we've seen, sort of quicker cycles to introduce more signals to ongoing monitoring and detection. So we did help where it's applicable for some OEMs.
Thank you. Next one, is the SecOc and secure diagnostic deployments in vehicle electronic enough to secure from cybersecurity threats?
I think, a big part of what we discussed today is also around the entire ecosystem across the vehicles. So you definitely have to be off board to be able to defend for some of the threats. So just to mention, like, the VinSpray attack, if you're inside the vehicle, you do not know that this is not a legitimate activity because you only see one request, and this request is from one vehicle point of view is extremely legitimate.
Or in that case, correlated across many vehicles, right?
Exactly.
Thank you. What are the best practices to safeguard EV charging infrastructure and monitor fleets of vehicles effectively?
I think, and maybe this is a bit broader than the scope here now, but there are a few aspects to the charging. So one is, let's say, from the pure OEM side, so monitoring just the vehicles and how they're impacted from charging. And this is also an area where we're seeing different types of use cases where the OEMs are impacted by, let's say, potentially malicious, suspicious, faulty charging stations, but also from the charge point operator point of view. So looking into, and again, this could be cyber attacks like we've seen, in the Ukraine and Russia, sort of hindering the availability of this the charging infrastructure, and also, and I guess we'll see a lot more of that on the fraud aspects. So people, trying not to pay, and we're also starting to see some use cases like that globally.
Thank you. Just got time for one more. What about leveraging AI to very rapidly enact playbook incident response algorithms and procedures?
Yeah, so I mean, I would say for this one, this is really looking ahead, I think past 2024 when you're looking at SOAR, and it gets in that fusion center convergence discussion as well, because I'm not sure if we're there yet with AI to be able to automate response. I think there's still a long way to go, but it will be a component, right? You will start to see AI, give recommendations to analysts or be able to correlate certain data. But I think, even on the traditional IT SOC side, I'm not even sure they're there yet with automated response for these type of sophisticated attacks that we're seeing in the mobility space.
Thank you. Just before I wrap up, is there anything else you want to add to today's presentation?
So I think we're just about at time, but before we go, I want to thank Brad and Yaniv. I think this is a great discussion. Definitely covered quite a bit of mobility here. Yaniv, I think you had a contact email you wanted me to share. I'll share that now for the audience, and if you want to speak to those joining us, where they could go for additional information, to kind of continue down this path and delve deeper into the topic. Why don't you share?
Yeah, and also I think we have the upcoming annual report for 2024. And exactly, so you can see the mailbox here on screen. So if you want to be the first to receive a copy, please reach out to us and make sure you're shortlisted to do that in the next few weeks. The much anticipated report will be out, and I think with very interesting new insights for you across the industry.
Thank you. And with that, I will bring the webinar to a close. Thanks to Yaniv, Brett, and Jason for sharing their insight today, and Upstream for helping to make the event possible. Thanks also to our audience for all your questions and your interest in today's event. As always, much appreciated. As mentioned earlier, we'll make slides and an on-demand version of this webinar available as soon as we can. But for now, thank you for listening and goodbye.